final backbench contribution, Gregory Stafford.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. And before I start on the main topic of Iran, I just want to put my condolences on the record to the family and friends of Anne Widdecombe. I met Anne Widdecombe, the only time I think I met her was when I was a teenager, late teenager, at the Oxford Union, and she was, like me, a former treasurer of the Oxford Union. And as the Honourable Member for Wetherby and Easingwold mentioned the Oxford Union, the King and Country debate, as he referenced, I also know that the other formative debate that the Oxford Union has every year is the no confidence debate. Yeah. And the no confidence debate always happens in September, October, the start of the academic year. And this year, as in the last academic year that we're just coming to the end of, the Oxford Union voted overwhelmingly to say it did not have confidence in His Majesty's government. Now, I'm not naive enough to believe that Labour members were following that debate carefully, and that is the reason why they have ousted the current Prime Minister. But I think it will be interesting to see that once again, the reason that we are here today, the reason that we are debating Iran is not because Iran is a serious issue, though of course it is. It is because the outgoing Prime Minister, the incoming Prime Minister, and Labour members did not want to have scrutiny of their new Prime Minister. They were so frightened of whatever they thought their new Prime Minister was going to say at the dispatch box, that they have given him cover for 6 weeks until he's had time to think about it. But we know from his own campaign manager, he's been plotting this coup for over a year. You would have thought that in that time he could have come up with a few answers, a few ideas, a few ways forward. But he won't speak to this House, he won't speak to journalists, presumably he doesn't even speak to Labour backbenchers. But hopefully, over the summer,
let them know what's happening.
Yes, hopefully over the summer, we will get to a point in September when he will come before this House and we can scrutinise him. Because as the Leader of the Opposition said today, in 1 second, as the Leader of the Opposition, my right honourable friend, said at Prime Minister's Questions time today, the problem here is not the Leader of the Labour Party or whoever is Prime Minister leading the Labour Party. It is the Labour Party fundamentally itself. And if this Labour Party has allowed their incoming Prime Minister to evade scrutiny, then they should all be ashamed of it. But I will give way.
I thank the Honourable Member for giving way. My Jewish constituents will be watching this debate, and I want to put on record my support for the government's ban of supporters of the IRGC. I also welcome the fact that the government has sanctioned that organisation and 500 Iranian-linked entities and individuals. I know he is an outspoken critic of that organisation, but he used this debate to repeat his criticism of it and to support the government's moves.
Well, the honourable member is entirely right, and I will come on to the RGC in my speech, and he is right to raise the concerns that his Jewish constituents, but not just Jewish constituents, I think all of our constituents of any faith or none, should fear the malign influence of the IRGC and the way that it has not just brutalised its own population, but again works here and other European and Western nations to the detriment of that. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, to bring it to Iran, for centuries Iran has been a nation of immense historical, cultural, civilisational importance. It's produced some of the world's greatest contributions to literature, to science, to the arts, to philosophy. So before the 79 revolution, Iran was widely regarded as one of the most advanced and outward-looking states in the Middle East. It was a country with a growing economy, expanding diplomatic ties with the West, and a strategic role as a regional partner for us here in Britain, but also in the United States and other democratic states. I don't say that to give honourable members and right honourable members a history lesson, but only to highlight that it is not the Iranian people or Iran itself that we have a problem with. It is the current fundamentalist regime in Tehran. And because that picture that I painted before 79 fundamentally changed during that revolution, because the previous system of government has essentially produced prosperity, while the Islamic Republic has fundamentally a different view and has pursued, I would say for 4 decades, the destruction of its own country and the Iranian people have suffered from increasing restrictions on political freedoms, suppression of dissent, economic mismanagement, and a state apparatus that has too often prioritised ideological ambition and external confrontation over the prosperity and liberty of its own citizens. And I was very disappointed, and I'm afraid he's not in his place anymore, he seems to have gone, the Honourable Member for Wokingham's speech, because it spent all its time blaming Donald Trump. And as I said in interventions, I've no love for Donald Trump or the way he has dealt with the issues in the regions, but not to stand and condemn Iran was shocking. And I did a quick search, and the Honourable Member for Wokingham has mentioned Donald Trump in 18 speeches in this House. Today was the first one where he mentioned Iran, and I think that balance is probably the wrong one. So the current regime does not represent the aspirations of millions of ordinary Iranians who've repeatedly risked their lives demanding greater freedoms, accountability, and the right to determine their own future. Our quarrel is with the regime that has systematically denied its citizens basic liberties, exported terrorism and instability across the Middle East and further, threatened our allies, and conducted hostile activity here in the United Kingdom. The courage of the Iranian people deserves all of our admiration. Since the end of last year, protests have spread across all 31 provinces, driven by that soaring inflation, the economic hardship, the corruption, and the decades of political repression. The response from the authorities in Tehran has once again demonstrated the methods upon which this regime relies: intimidation, arbitrary detention, restrictions on communications, and the use of force against those who simply demand a better future. Therefore, support for the Iranian people must go hand in hand with a clear-eyed assessment of the wider threat posed by the Iranian regime. For decades, Iran has sought to project power beyond its borders, not through normal diplomacy, as some in this chamber seem to think it has, but through intimidation, terrorism, and proxy warfare. It is armed, financed, and directed militant organisations across the Middle East in pursuit of its strategic objectives. It has threatened Israel, our Gulf partners, and other American allies. And this culminated in the attack on a number of our allies earlier this year and last year. And I had the opportunity in May last year to go to Bahrain to see our troops there, and to think that they were being bombed by Iran is utterly disgusting, and we need to have a robust response. And I have to say, I found the response of the United Kingdom government and of the current Prime Minister at best weak-willed, because he seemed to be happy to allow American fighter jets to take off from our bases. He seemed to be willing for us to shoot down, to use British fighters to shoot down incoming missiles, but he wasn't willing to use our bases and our fighter jets to shoot the launchers of those missiles. And that seems to me utterly bizarre. And I think the Prime Minister was extraordinarily fortunate that one of those incoming missiles didn't hit and kill personnel at Akrotiri, or didn't hit a hotel in Dubai full of British citizens. Because I think if that had happened, the British public's mood towards this Prime Minister would have changed, and changed rapidly. And I do hope the incoming Prime Minister will have a much more robust response when dealing with these threats from not just from Iran, but a number of its proxy actors. I will.
I'm grateful to my honourable friend. And in that one sentence, does my honourable friend not sum up what the problem with today's debate's been? Is that clearly from the speeches that have been made from the front bench and from the contributions that have been made, that this does not represent a debate as outlined by the Leader of the House yesterday with such urgency. It clearly was there to stop a motion being put to this House to make the new Prime Minister come to this House, and that we are now going to go through weeks and weeks, at least a month and a half, before we have any ability to answer any of the questions that my honourable friend has just made.
My right honourable friend is entirely right. The fact that the incoming Prime Minister has run away from any kind of scrutiny, whether it be from us, whether it be from the press or anybody else, I think does him a disservice. And I think he will come to regret that decision, because I think actually, not that I know the right honourable gentleman personally, but from my understanding from Labour members that I've spoken to, he is a man who is good on his feet. He can talk. So it surprises me that he doesn't want to come and answer those questions. Nonetheless, we are having this debate, and it is an important one, because the proxies that I've spoken about Hezbollah, for example, remains a heavily armed organisation despite international obligations and years of diplomatic pressure. Hamas has not abandoned violence, and the Houthis continue to threaten freedom of navigation and regional security well beyond Yemen. Iran's network of proxies may be under pressure, but it remains one of the principal drivers of instability across the Middle East. And that brings us to the role, as the Honourable Member on the opposite benches talked about, of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. The IRGC cannot simply be treated as an ordinary branch of government. It is the institution most closely associated with Iran's external military operations, its support for those proxy groups, its intimidation campaigns abroad, and its efforts to undermine the security and safety of Britain and our allies. Earlier this year, I co-signed a letter to the Foreign Secretary calling for the IRGC to be proscribed under the Terrorism Act 2000. I did so because the evidence is compelling and recent developments have only strengthened the case for action. So I welcome steps taken in recent years to respond to the increased threat proposed by Iran. Last year, the Iranian state was placed on the enhanced FIRS scheme. This was an important national security measure to increase transparency around activities undertaken on behalf of foreign powers. More than 500 Iranian individuals and entities have been sanctioned, restricting their access to the international financial system, imposing consequences on those responsible for the malign activity, and demonstrating, I think, that Britain will not ignore threats to our national security. That is also why I welcome the Home Secretary's announcement that the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps will be prescribed under the Terrorism Act. I think that is a really significant step, and I welcome it, because it reflects the reality that the IRGC is not merely a political or even a military institution of a foreign government, but an organisation that is responsible for activities that pose a direct threat to Britain, our citizens and our allies. I'd like to note that colleagues on this side of the House have been calling for that prescription of the terror organisation as early as 2023, and I also know that there are, across this chamber, others who have done so, and I thank them for their efforts to getting us to this point. So the government has taken a number of important steps to respond to this threat posed by Iran. But this is an important national security measure because it is designed to increase transparency. But we should also be clear about what those measures were and what they're not. Sanctions matter. They're really, really important, despite what some honourable members on the opposite benches said. Foreign influence registration matters. Action against Iran-linked organisations matters. But they're not the same as prescription under the Terrorism Act. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, this debate also takes place against the backdrop of Iran's continuing nuclear ambitions. Britain has consistently supported diplomacy in the region where diplomacy can succeed. That remains the right approach. But nobody should underestimate the consequences of further military action and escalation in the Middle East. Because diplomacy cannot succeed without pressure. It cannot succeed without enforcement. And it cannot succeed if Iran believes that international commitments can be ignored without consequence. Sanctions, international coordination and robust enforcement all have a role to play. The international community must remain determined that Iran cannot acquire a nuclear weapon capability that would further destabilise an already fragile region and place additional pressure on our allies. From past engagement, we know that the Iranian regime has historically responded not to weakness or ambiguity or pleasant overtures, but to strength, unity and resolve. Iranian state-linked actors have been responsible for hostile activity directed towards the United Kingdom, including the intimidation, espionage and threats that I mentioned against individuals on British soil. Protecting the British public must remain the government's first duty, and our response must therefore match that scale of threat. Madam Deputy Speaker, undoubtedly, Iran faces profound internal challenges of its own. Its economy, its regional position, the public confidence in the regime are, as altogether, a real pressure on that regime. But unfortunately, none of that internal pressure means that change is inevitable. So the British public expect this government not merely to recognise the threats, but to confront them. So in closing, I wish to ask the Minister a few questions. First, what is the timetable for completing the legal process for bringing the prescription fully into force? Second, what steps has the government taken to ensure that the evidence base and legal reasoning underpinning this What steps has the government taken to ensure that the evidence base and legal reasoning underpinning this decision are sufficiently robust to withstand any potential judicial challenge? Thirdly, what assessment has the government made of the likelihood of any appeal or judicial review, and what contingency planning is being brought should legal proceedings be brought? Fourth, what additional operational benefits will prescription provide to the police and security services in identifying, disrupting and prosecuting IRGC-linked activity in the United Kingdom? And finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, how will the government work with our international partners, including the United States and other allies, who have long recognised the threat posed by the IRGC, to ensure this decision has maximum impact?
Close. He talked about the importance of international cooperation to stop Iran from acquiring that nuclear capability, and I completely agree with him. Where the UK has had success before has been in concert with the French and also with the Germans. With the French presidential election this year and the moving on of the current president, would he agree with me that there's a real opportunity for Britain to lead that European cooperation to try and address the possibility of Iran acquiring a nuclear capability?
I thank the honourable gentleman for his intervention, and I agree that Britain should be the leader and at the forefront of any negotiations and any international coalitions, not just because I think we have the skills and the history to be able to do so, but because I think it demonstrates to our European allies and perhaps even more importantly to the Americans that we as a country are willing to stand up and do our bit. So, in closing, Madam Deputy Speaker, the government really must now ensure that the decision that it's taken, the right decision it's taken, is implemented swiftly, defended robustly and enforced effectively. The decision has been made, now the test is the delivery.
The Shadow Minister, Mark Francois.